Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today we have another exciting guest on the podcast. He's running for governor of Minnesota. He's with the Independence Party. His name is Hugh McTavish. Welcome to the podcast, Hugh.
Thank you, Andrew.
Let us get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Sure. I am a PhD biochemist and a patent attorney. I've started two pharmaceutical companies off my own inventions, one called IGF Oncology and the other SquareX, with drugs in clinical trials. And got interested or motivated to run for president because of my opposition to the lockdowns during COVID. And I started a nonprofit called COVID Sanity to disseminate accurate information about the benefits and harms of the lockdowns, and wrote a book called COVID Lockdown Insanity.
Interesting. So kindly tell us what led you to the Independence Party in particular.
The Independence Party is fiscally conservative and socially liberal, I guess, which is about where I am.
Okay.
And I am, largely it's the lockdowns. I'm strongly opposed to the lockdowns. On most other issues, I probably align more with Democrats than Republicans. But, so I don't think there's room in the Democratic Party for an anti-lockdown voice right now. So I disagree, basically. I agree with both parties on some issues, both major parties on some issues, and disagree on some others. And I just don't think I'm a good fit for either party, I guess. Also, I'm running with the main proposal of my campaign is a concept I call jury democracy, where we have we invite a random selection of registered voters, like 500 to 1,000, that constitute a statistically valid sample of all registered voters, and they listen to the arguments for and against a particular bill or a proposal, and then they vote on it. And so effectively it could be a new house of the legislature. But so with that proposal, or my campaign in particular, I would like to be rather above the partisan fray, so I think it helps to not be with either of the two major parties also.
Sure. The jury democracy idea is innovative sounding. You don't hear that idea every day.
No, it's my idea. I came up with it actually like 30 years ago, and always thought I'd write a book about it to try to get the idea out there and implement it. And then because of the lockdowns, really, I was motivated to run for governor, and realized that if I run for governor, I can largely implement jury democracy. We can get it out in the debate, just in the campaign, and then if I win, I can largely implement it. So that's a much better way, I think, to get it into the debate and get the idea out there than writing a book.
Sounds good. So how has your professional and or academic experience informed your political views?
I don't know that, I guess like anybody, my life experiences inform my views. I would say I'm in the pharmaceutical industry, so I think the pharmaceutical industry is a noble industry. A lot of people seem to have very negative feelings about big pharma and the pharmaceutical industry. And there's some problems with big pharma for sure, but not so much with small pharma. And I think it's a noble thing. So I push back a little bit against the vilification of drug companies. They got us vaccines that are effective and mostly safe. I oppose vaccine mandates, but I think these COVID vaccines are effective and have reduced deaths. And they got those in months, basically. So that was a heroic effort, I think, by the pharmaceutical companies. So I'm pro pharmaceuticals and pro intellectual property. I'm a patent attorney. I'm very sympathetic to inventors. I feel I'm fighting for the good guys and trying to get small inventors patents. Yeah, so that I guess that affects my thinking also.
Sure. So what are your opponents in your race like?
Well, Tim Walz is the incumbent. He's a Democrat in Minnesota, and running again. And so he's implemented very strong lockdowns. We had 7 weeks of stay-at-home order. He's from southern Minnesota, a rural section of Minnesota, but his strength really politically now is the Twin Cities. I don't think he's got a lot of support in the outstate. And seems like a nice enough guy, but I think catastrophic decisions on the lockdowns that led to explosion of suicides and drug overdose deaths and clinical depression, in addition to huge loss of freedom by being locked in our homes for 7 weeks. And the vaccine mandates and the mask mandates, et cetera. So I disagree with him. I think he's been a terrible governor in that sense, but decent enough guy, I'm sure. And the Republican front runner is a physician, family practice physician named Scott Jensen. He's not a sure thing to get the nomination, but I guess he's the front runner. He's a family practice doctor, served 1 term in the legislature, and I think pretty standard Republican positions on most things, and opposed the lockdowns. I give him some credit for opposing the lockdowns, and he's been the physician standards boards. He's been reported to them and investigated like 5 times for opposing the lockdowns. People keep trying to strip his medical license because he opposes the lockdowns.
Oh my. Interesting. So kindly tell us the demographics of Minnesota. I used to live in Minnesota, so I'm familiar, but some of our audience, probably most of our audience, haven't been around Minnesota. So kindly tell the demographics of Minnesota to our audience.
Well, about half the population is in the Twin Cities metro area and half in rural areas. It's relatively more white than other places, I suppose, but the Twin Cities metro certainly is plenty diverse. People don't, actually one of the interesting things about it is people don't leave or come here. It's, I think maybe the state with the lowest in-migration rate and the lowest out-migration rate. So the people who live here like it, but the people who don't live here are scared away by the cold, basically, I think, from moving here.
Interesting. I never heard that before. That's interesting. So during the race, and God willing, if you win the race and become the governor of Minnesota, how do you plan to implement your Independence Party vision?
Well, mostly by jury democracy. So that's, as I said, calling for any important or controversial bill or decision, calling a jury to St. Paul, to our state capitol, from randomly selected from across the state, about 1,000 registered voters, and have them listen to the arguments for and against the bill, and then have them read the bill, actually, which would put them ahead of some legislators.
Sure.
I don't mean that as a slam on legislators, but they don't really have time to read every bill. And then make a decision. And so I think with that, the decisions will be made based on reason and evidence instead of campaign contributions and influence. And I have a lot of confidence that the people as a whole will make really good decisions. I don't know if you're familiar with, like James Surowiecki wrote a book a number of years ago about the wisdom of crowds. If you have, like, you ask people at, say, a county fair or whatever to pick a big jar of marbles or M&Ms and guess how many marbles or M&Ms are in that jar, the average of everybody's guess will be better than 98% of the individual guesses.
Huh.
So the crowd has I think the crowd makes good decisions generally.
So what issues are Minnesota facing these days? You mentioned the lockdown, so that sounds like one of them. What other issues are Minnesota facing these days?
The lockdowns, we've unfortunately had the George Floyd killing and a number of other prominent police killings, so we've kind of become the world capital for police killings of civilians. So that's a big issue. There's some environmental issues, oil pipeline from the Canadian tar sands that run across here and across Indian reservations that people oppose, and I oppose those, and copper and nickel mining near the Boundary Waters and near Lake Superior that would leach sulfuric acid into the groundwater and leach toxic metals into the groundwater, mercury and other toxic metals into the groundwater. So I oppose those as well. So those are some of the environmental issues.
So in regard to the police issues, how are you planning on addressing those?
My proposal, we've got a state law in Minnesota, I don't know if many other states are like this, that police can't be fired or disciplined without it going to arbitration. And the arbitrators routinely overturn any attempt to fire or discipline any particular officer. You almost have to be charged with murder to be fired. So I would repeal that law, and I would give the mayor and the city council and the police chief in each jurisdiction authority, each of them separately, authority to fire or discipline any officer they want for any valid reason, not for politically opposing them or something, but any sort of misconduct. I don't think we should be in arguments about how bad does misconduct have to be before you can get fired. The rest of us can be fired. Well, most of us are at-will employees. Most of us can be fired for any reason or no reason. I think even more so, police officers should be held to that standard.
Makes sense. One thing I noticed that's interesting is, from my experience, the people who oppose lockdowns are sometimes portrayed as those who are against science because they're against the CDC and they're against Dr. Fauci and they don't believe in the vaccines. But you're an immunologist, and you mentioned before that you support the vaccines. So kindly explain how you handle those discrepancies, those tensions.
Yes, well, I support the vaccines, but I oppose vaccine mandates. I think people should have control over their bodies, and you should need a very good reason to mandate that they impose something be imposed on their bodies. And I'm a scientist. Science is about data. Dr. Fauci and the CDC, they really have not followed the data. The data says that in my book, I've got a chapter on this. Masks make little or no difference. That's a quote from Cochrane Reviews, which is reviewed the clinical trial data on the effect of masks. They make little or no difference. The best evidence on masks is a clinical trial in Denmark that concluded on, I think it was 4,000 people randomized to either wear masks or not wear masks. And there was no significant difference in infection rates between the two groups. There's really no good evidence that the masks work. So, and other things are like that. The premise behind the vaccine mandates is that the vaccines prevent spread. If vaccinated people are far, a mandate only makes sense if vaccinated people are much less likely to spread COVID than unvaccinated people. They're not. If they were, we would have been at herd immunity last summer, because between the number of people who were infected and the number of people who were vaccinated, we probably had at least 70%, and probably over 80% of the population was either vaccinated or infected. So those people should have been immune. We should have been at herd immunity. But instead, we had a peak in August of 2021 that was 3 times the size of the peak in the summer of 2020. And then in January, we had a peak in cases that was 3 times the peak in the previous winter. So clearly vaccination did not prevent infection. So that's the data. That's the way a scientist thinks. I think you don't just. I don't stand up at a scientific conference and say, here are my conclusions. I'm not going to show you my data. Just trust me. I've got a PhD. But that's basically what Fauci does. He stands up and says, just trust me. I'm not going to show you the data. That's not the way science works.
So is the issue with the infection rate itself, do you think the vaccines can prevent people from getting sicker? So do you think they have some value? Is that the...
Oh, yeah, yes. The vaccines reduce death and hospitalization. I believe that. I think that's what the data shows. But they don't substantially reduce infection, getting some kind of symptoms. And once you've got symptoms, it doesn't really matter how severe your symptoms are. You're contagious to other people. And
Sure.
in fact, if you've got milder symptoms, you're more likely to go out and to continue to go out in public. So you're more likely, actually, I think, to spread than unvaccinated people. And I think that's actually what the data suggests to me, is that vaccinated people are more likely to spread the disease to others than unvaccinated people.
So since you're a patent attorney, do you plan on changing any Minnesota laws in regards to patents?
No, patent law is really a federal thing. So no, I've got no agenda to change that.
Okay, fair enough. So what is your campaign strategy?
I want to appeal to everybody. The jury democracy thing, I think, can appeal to everybody, can appeal to Trump voters, the prototypical Trump voter who's light, rural, not a college degree, working class. That person thinks the system doesn't pay attention to them and that the elites look down their noses at them and sneers at them. And I think they're right about both those things. The system doesn't do anything for them, and the elites do look down their nose at them. I'm giving those people real power. They'll sit on the jury. They'll be a substantial percentage of the jurors. So they'll have real power. And on the left end of the spectrum, again, working class people, the 99% as the Occupy Wall Street movement said, racial minorities, women, all those people will be represented proportional to their numbers. The 99% will constitute 99% of the jurors. They'll have 99% of the power. So I aim to appeal to both sides of the political spectrum.
Interesting. So how about fundraising? How are you planning to raise funds for your campaign?
Boy, that's a tough one. I'm not real good about hitting up my friends and contacts for money. I'm kind of shy about doing that, but I think I need to do that. But I've got a decent following on TikTok. We'll try to get more traffic to our campaign with social media and word of mouth. Explain our positions on our website and hopefully get donations. I hope there's billionaires and foundations that also aim to promote democracy and civil society, and I think the jury democracy idea really fits into that vision, so hopefully we can get some donations from them.
Sure. So what type of campaign leadership structure do you have? Are you running it by yourself? Do you have a team with you? How is that going?
I have a team. Phil Fuhrer is my campaign manager. He's the chairman of the Independence Party in Minnesota. And then I've got advisors that we've talked about campaign strategy. A couple of other members of the Independence Party, and Joe Cunningham, who is chief financial officer of my companies actually, and Renda Teeple, who's a pharmacist that I've worked with. So those are my main advisors. But I'm trying to have this not be a one-person shop.
Sure, sounds good. So with your leadership, how do you motivate your staff to take action and to run your campaign?
Oh, I don't know. hopefully get them excited about the jury democracy idea and have them want to push that vision forward. I think that's probably the main thing.
Sounds good. So for our audience out there, whether you live in Minnesota or they live elsewhere and they want to support your campaign, how would they support your campaign?
My website is McTavish, 4mn.org. If you just Google McTavish for governor or Hugh McTavish for governor, you should find it. And you can make a donation there, and I encourage people to do that.
So they can donate at McTavish4mn.org.
.org, yeah.
Sounds like a plan.
Great. Thank you, Andrew.
Sure thing. Hugh, thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your views. We wish you all the best in your campaign and all your other personal and professional endeavors.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care and all the best.
Okay. You too.